up next, we have a panel on diversity, equality, and inclusion. Dominique Rees is going to be moderating that discussion. She's our DE&I program manager, along with Neda Amidi as well, who is the president of Plug and Play Tech Center. Also sharing their stories in that panel will be Danny Guillory, the VP and Chief Diversity Officer at Dropbox. We also have Uzair Kadir, the Chief Human Resource Officer at Carbon Health. And lastly, Josephine Gartrell, the Senior Director and Executive Compensation and Board Advisory at Willis Tower Watson. Please put your hands together and welcome our panel to the stage.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's good to see everyone still here. I am Dominique. I am the head of DE&I here at Plug and Play. I've been here for about 3 years now, and we're just now starting our DE&I initiative. So happy to have everyone here and happy to have this discussion on the panel today. So as Plug and Play's leading innovation platform, we believe that innovation goes just beyond technology. So we're here today to hear from these wonderful panelists to hear about how DE&I influences the future of our work environment. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Josephine, Danny, Uzair, and Neda to speak with us today. So I gave a short introduction, but if they want to give a short introduction to themselves, that would be great.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Josephine Gartrell. I'm a senior director in our Exec Comp and Board Advisory Services at Willis Tower Watson, and I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Danny Guillory. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Dropbox. Before that, was in the same role at Autodesk and then spent a lot of years consulting on this work with companies around the world.
Thank you. Good morning. Uzair Kadir, Chief People Officer at Carbon Health. Carbon is the second fastest growing private company out there, a healthcare organization. So we have about 4,000 employees globally. Prior to that, I was the Chief Diversity Officer at Alexion Pharmaceuticals and have spent a third of my career living and working in Europe. So this is a topic that lives really near and dear to my heart.
Hello, Neda Amidi, President at Plug and Play. I think everyone's heard the introductions about Plug and Play, but I'll give a brief intro to myself. I've been with Plug and Play for about 9 years, and Plug and Play is a family business, and I'm third generation family member in the family business, so it's super personal. And I'm incredibly excited to be here to talk about our D&I initiatives. I've specifically focused on our people, our operations, and our investment. And diversity is a very close topic to my heart, so really thrilled to be here. And thank you to Dominique for getting this amazing group of people together.
Yes, thank you so much. And everyone on this stage is truly amazing. And I've already learned so much about D&I from them prior to this, so I'm just excited to have them share it with you all here today. So one of the first questions I wanted to just get started with is, what does D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, mean specifically to you?
Maybe I'll start off since I have the mic. It's a great question. I think I tried to take the definitions and more so apply it to myself. So diversity is really the way in which we're all different from one another. I'm an Iranian American woman, and that's maybe how I'm different from Uzair or different from someone in the audience. And that really, to me, that's kind of the diversity piece when it comes to me. Around equity, it's really creating fair treatment. So because I'm an Iranian American woman, I'm not getting treated any differently. And that's something that, in my role and also in the work that we're doing with people across Plug and Play is an important topic, is to make sure that you create an environment, and that goes to the inclusion piece. That's about the environment and making sure everyone has a voice. And in the past 2.5 years, that's been especially tricky with this virtual world, and not everyone is comfortable, I would say, in that world. And now that we've gone more into hybrid, it's also making sure, the people in the room and also the people virtually feel heard and feel included. So little bit of my definitions and how I kind of apply it to myself and the work that we do here.
That was wonderful. Now I have to go after that. Well, I'll start with what diversity means to me personally, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how I think about it. Personally, it means a lot of things to me. As somebody who moved to this country as a migrant, somebody who's lived and worked in 5 different countries, I do speak 6 languages. I'm a gay man who lives in a world largely built around straight people. I can tell you that diversity means many, many things to me personally. And those things are really important and fundamental to the core of who I am. But when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I almost think about them not as the destination, but means to the perfect destination. And what I mean by that is that, yes, diversity is so important. Inclusion is an imperative that just cannot wait. Equity is of paramount importance. But those are means to the ultimate end goal that I think is the most important. And I think of that end goal as belonging. I define belonging as that moment where we can all feel included because of our uniqueness, not despite of it. And we have to do all the work we can do in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion to create that relentless sense of belonging, where every single one of us can unapologetically belong and thrive and have conditions for them to succeed. So that's kind of how I like to think about it and what it means to me.
Sarah, I have to ask this question. What are your 6 languages?
I do, the first one will surprise everyone. I do speak English, which I'm trying to speak right now. I also do speak Italian. I lived in Rome for many years and worked in Italy. I do speak Spanish as well. I learned that when I lived and worked in Barcelona. So there is a lot of controversy around extra conjugations that I throw out and all the old-fashioned words that I use for those that live and grew up in the Americas. I do speak, in addition to English, Spanish, and Italian, I do speak Hindi and Punjabi, and my mother is from a part of India where they speak Urdu, so I speak Urdu as well.
Thanks. I'm going to try and make it quick because I know we're on a clock here. We've got like these numbers counting down right now in front of us. Quick question for all of you. And I know you've been sitting for a while, so I'm going to ask you if you're able to stand up if you answer yes to this question so I can get a gauge of the room. How many of you are founders in here? Founders are working in a startup? Okay. 1. Okay. How many of you are with corporate partners? Corporate partners of the organization. Go ahead and stand up. Raise your hand. You've been sitting for the last half an hour, 40 minutes. Okay, super. All right, this gives me a sense of the room. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. So a lot of you have heard a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion before in the organizations that you've worked with, I'm sure. Very simply for me, and how we talk about it at Dropbox is diversity is people, equity is fairness, and inclusion is a mindset. And it's a mindset where I actually view diversity as a positive, because the thing is that diversity is always there, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. The question is, are we actively taking advantage of it? Because if we're not, then it's actually a negative and a draw on what we're doing if we're not paying attention to it. A simple way to kind of think about it as I'm approaching work on a day-to-day basis is using the dimensions of diversity. So when I think about diversity, I think of human diversity, which is about my identity and who I am. A lot of the ways we traditionally talk about it, like sex or race or ethnicity. Cultural diversity, which is really focused on how I think. So it's not tangible. It's things like my thinking style, my working style, the languages that I speak, the ethics that I have, the religion that I participate in if I do. And then finally, systems diversity, which is how I do things, how I work in the workplace. And the question that I put to all of you to kind of challenge you in any situation and where you can see the relevance of diversity is there some way that human, cultural, or systems diversity is a part of a decision that I'm making or not? And you can literally use that little prompt at the end of almost any meeting that you're in to start to think about diversity. Because again, diversity is one of those things that's always there. The question is, are we asking questions about it and thinking about it proactively?
Thank you, and I get the privilege of going last. So I will just echo everything that everyone has already said on the panel and maybe put a different practical spin on it for those in the corporate environment. So when we think about equity and diversity and inclusion at Willis Towers Watson, we think about it from many perspectives. How does your total rewards program identify those who might need, for example, transportation needs, or they live in a community where the internet isn't as good, or your benefits programs need to represent your workforce. So those kinds of total rewards programs are really important to us to make sure that all of our employees feel like they are included and taken care of from that perspective. Another thing that we think about is hiring and succession planning, and are our processes in place, putting in a pipeline that represents all of the diversity within our organization. And the employee experience is also very important to us because we want to make sure that whatever groups you identify with, that you have a voice. And as an example, all of this month in June, we have received many invitations to both Pride Month and Juneteenth, speaking forums, listening forums. Anyone that's an ally for any group is able to join those, whether that's a book club, watching a movie, listening to your colleagues. And so from my perspective as a woman and one of our older members of our consulting team, it makes me very happy to see that we do have a very integrated workforce, and something that we try very hard as a culture to have an inclusive workforce.
Thank you. And I wanted to point out, thank you, Danny, for doing that experiment, because I see there are a lot of corporate partners in the room, and I do want to make sure everyone leaves here with something they can take back to their company. And the topic of this panel is, how does D&I influence the future of work, and how does it lead to a successful work environment? And I'm sure the rest of the panelists will touch on it, but differing opinions, having different people in the room leads to different successes and different outcomes. So some may be implementing D&I strategies within their company, or some may not have D&I strategies. And I know Plug and Play is committing to implementing that moving forward, both internally and externally. And it's a long and hard process, but it's definitely for the better. So everyone sitting on here, you've implemented different D&I strategies for your company. How has that been? What is some advice you can give to people in the room that may want to start implementing or better their D&I strategies? And how do you go from something that's ornamental and just an idea and making it something that's tangible for their company?
I get to go first. So ornamental. So my biggest piece of advice would be to try to start off as early as possible in getting your DE&I policies and strategies put into place. If you're starting a little bit later in your place of work, then listen to your employees, figure out through data what those gaps are. Where do you have communities that are not necessarily represented across different job families, and identify from a benefits perspective where you have gaps there as well. And you can use a lot of data to drive those recognitions and decisions, and then fill in those gaps.
Sure. So a couple pieces of advice. One is it's a profession. Okay, a lot of times with diversity, people think that they can do it because they are people. A lot of times I get advice from people across the organization. Let me put it this way. I don't go to our head of engineering and say, you know what, let me tell you how you should redesign our website. Okay? That doesn't happen. I don't do that often. And so with diversity, I really encourage you to think about, first of all, hiring professionals. So if you don't have somebody in-house, then make sure you get a consultant, actually, who does this kind of work. And if you're in-house, I will tell you that one of the things that messages to the organization the extent to which you're serious about diversity, so not being ornamental as you put it, is the investment you put in. You can look at the ratios of the number of people you have on a diversity team versus your population, and that starts to give you a sense and send a message to the rest of the company. The second thing is to have some kind of key objective that is a company-wide objective. For us at Dropbox, we have aspirations that I actually inherited before I joined 3 years ago, regarding the representation of women and underrepresented minorities at the mid-career level and above, which then trickles down, because then we're having discussions about retention, about promotion, not just about hiring, because it's really easy to kind of gin the system a little bit if you just worry about overall workforce population. But if you have to touch all those levers, then it becomes very different. And for those of you who are in certain industries, I think there's another exciting opportunity, which is actually the marketplace. If you have something that's really kind of a consumer-based product where that really makes a difference versus something where it's maybe more agnostic, there's a real discussion about your market, your customer, what they look like, how they think, how they do things. And that should obviously be reflected in the workforce that you have. So there are lots of different ways that you can apply different lenses of diversity along the way, and that's why I used that question to begin with. But what I'd really start to do, going back to your comment with respect to data, is look at your data across all different demographics and cutting the employee experience all the way through. So from the time that people come in top of funnel to how quickly they pass through the interview process, to what kind of offer they get to begin with, to what their experience is like with their manager, to how they get experience development in the organization, and to then what promotion rates look like over time. So you can map the whole employee experience and cut that by different demographic factors, whether that be location, whether that be gender and ethnicity, whether that be age, whatever it is. And where there's a gap, there's an issue and an opportunity. And that's what you're looking for with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. And I really appreciated your comment about respecting the craft and hiring experts to do the job. People sometimes forget that. So I'll build off of that a little bit. And very similar to kind of what you said, I think when you're thinking about setting up your diversity programs, think about a much bigger and broader picture. So for example, traditionally and typically diversity programs in companies have been set up in a way that they overwhelmingly focus on only one component of it, which is employee diversity. Creating the employee resource groups and trying to find a way to create and curate programs that can help employees, thrive in the corporate setting. That's a piece of it. That's a very important piece of it. That's a piece of it. I challenge you to think a little bit bigger, because the full picture is a lot bigger than that. So the first vertical of your diversity program, when you structure, as in structure is important, is that employee diversity. Turning your organization into both a magnet and an incubator of diverse talent. What are the programs you can put there? All the things you talked about as well. The second vertical then should be about harnessing insights of employees who have those diverse backgrounds and leveraging and connecting those insights directly to your customer agenda and customer diversity. You want to make sure that those programs are very closely connected. So you're giving your employees an opportunity to constantly innovate on behalf of the customer. You can create a diversity innovation factory in-house where employees are digitally ideating ideas to drive customer innovation. If you have a retail footprint, link it right back to the customer-facing employee and get those insights as quickly as possible to drive programs for diverse customers as well. And the last pillar is really about creating and articulating and relentless, powerful, and clear and consistent external diversity, inclusion, and belonging brand. That includes, the employer branding that you put out there, the marketplace presence that you have, how you deal with your customers, but also how you drive your investor narrative. If you have investors, if you're a public company, how do you prepare for your, IR work and talk about diversity as a part of that? You want to make sure that your employees feel seen, heard, respected, and nurtured. But then that diversity, that red thread follows all the way through. It creates something wonderful for the customer, and it also helps the outsiders and investors and others understand the value of why diversity is so important as well. Yes.
2 things to what you said. Just 2 points. How many of you are with public companies? Can you raise your hand? Anybody with public companies? Okay. So as you know, at the board level now, ESG is a big thing, and diversity is now a major part of the reporting process in board meetings. So it's not actually getting less attention. It's getting more attention from the SEC and from organizations like that with requiring human capital reports and things like that. The second part about employer brand is so key. So all of you are competing for talent out there, right? I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say they joined the organization because of what they saw in the Dropbox diversity report. Okay, so the employees that you're looking to hire are looking at this now a lot more than they did at the past. So if you want to be competitive, it's another factor you want to consider. Yeah.
Great, thank you. A lot of great things have been said. I think I want to rewatch this session and take some great notes. So some great advice for us here as well. I think there's a lot that one can do in terms of D&I, and it can be overwhelming. I know when we started the journey and we're earlier on in the journey, as a younger company, it was incredibly overwhelming. You know, what can we do internally in terms of people, hiring, training, events? And what can we do externally when it comes to our portfolio, when it comes to our ecosystem of corporates, and doing more panels and events like this. So really, I would say prioritizing with the low-hanging fruit probably initially, and then building kind of around that as well. A good part of the process for us has been listening as well to people internally, and learning from people on this panel externally, as we shape kind of our strategy. But really just hearing a lot of great advice here, and we'll be, you know, continuing this discussion as well in a roundtable later. But really great to have everyone here, and I just wanted to ask a question. I know it's like 5.5 minutes, like ticking, but for some folks that maybe are newer to D&I, I'd love to hear maybe from the panel, how did you get into this field? And if someone's interested in building a career in this field, like what advice would you have for them?
I can very quickly start. I think I shared with you a little bit. It's just something that's been very present in my entire life in many different ways, and just really, really inspires me. I think that when I think about belonging, creating conditions for all people to thrive equally so they can belong, I think that sits at the core of who I am as a person. I'll say this, you know, I think about it this way, right? I think that diversity is a fact, inclusion is an act, and belonging is a pact. And a pact requires for all people to jump in, roll up their sleeves, and do all they can. And that's what I think inspires me to get in and be a part of it and make a difference.
I'll mention a couple things. So in terms of paths, there isn't a clear one. I know there are certifications out there, but I can tell you the way that I've gotten to where I am in this work is through kind of the workshop of life, is what my dad would refer to it as. I do think, though, there are 5 key competencies for diversity, and something that I've thought a lot about. In no particular order. One is the ability to facilitate. So almost every discussion, I tell my diversity team this all the time, almost every discussion we have is a mini workshop, whether it's one-on-one with somebody or whether it's with a group. You're always trying to move somebody from point A to point B around something that they've thought and held deeply for a long time. So one is the ability to facilitate. The second is to be able to draw insights and storytell from data. Okay, that's obvious, I think. We've talked about that already. The third one is to be able to navigate politically, because the thing about diversity roles is that typically, although people in my industry are getting smarter about it now, but typically they've been ones where it's strictly through influence. Typically, we don't own a vertical. Okay, so that means I need to be able to understand how to navigate an organization politically. The fourth one is to be an evangelist, and this was something that somebody else told me, because typically we're working through other people. And so it's got to be something where people are getting excited and inspired to do things. And the last one is to understand organizational development, because what I'm doing when I go into an organization is looking at different parts of the system and how it works, telling people what's wrong with it, and trying to convince them to change it. Okay, so you have to understand org development too. The last thing I'll say is, you know, when you talked about people and where they are in organizations and if they want to get started. Okay, so let's say I'm an individual, I'm not a diversity professional, I'd like to impact things some way. Well, you don't have to be a diversity professional. That's the great thing. And in fact, people who own P&Ls in here, you are actually the powerful ones. Okay, we're trying to get you to do things. You're in the role, in the seat of power. So don't forget that. The 3 things I tell people, and this is what we actually designed our diversity commitments around Dropbox on, is 1, to hire a diverse team. Okay, so you have the ability to hire people. So think about those dimensions of diversity: human, cultural, and systems. And am I hiring people across all of those dimensions? The second is to advance and develop people equitably. So when I think about my team, do I just focus on the extrovert, or do I also consider the introvert, okay, who may not speak up for themselves and represent themselves as often? And the last one is to engage in personal growth, because this work is constantly changing. I've been in it for a long time, and I can tell you the last 3 years have been a dramatic shift from what I experienced even in the 5 years prior. So those 3 things are something that anybody in any role can do to impact diversity on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. And I will just say that from a personal path perspective, I'm actually an exec comp lawyer and consultant. So I do this kind of consulting with my colleagues who are much better at it than I am. But from the point that was made earlier, I'm in the pact. Willis Tower Watson is very adamant about everyone having an inclusive environment. And so, I sit on the Multicultural Inclusion Network. I run the Women's Affinity Group in Executive Compensation, which we have the largest number of women in consulting in that field. And they run from the most junior analyst all the way up to the most senior managing director. So those are two things that really bring a lot of pleasure to me. I also work with our LGBTQ plus community and engage with them quite a bit, especially during the month of June. And then we have a lot of different mentorship programs that I also engage in, and my colleagues do too. So you can pick your affinity groups, you can pick your own individual, identify your own individual needs, and your colleagues will be supportive there. So the clock is ticking. We're at 30 seconds left, but but to their point, it's becoming more of a vertical, and we do a lot more work with more senior level diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals versus even what we did 3 years ago, where it was not its own vertical. So I'm very happy about that as well.
Wow, time flies. Time really flies. But I think the main takeaway is going back to the pact and diversity. It's a collaborative effort, and it's something that takes a lot of people to have conversations and come into a room and talk through, what is your organization going through? How can we all work together and learn from each other to help change? And I think that's what we're going to continue with the conversation upstairs at around 11. So Plug and Play will be leading the conversation with these wonderful people here, as well as some other people that will be joining us about how can we collaborate together to help our organizations and also help underrepresented founders in different communities moving forward. So thank you all. Let's give them a big round of applause, and thank you all.